Good turnout tonight. Well done, y'all. Oh, got a little hot there. Let's open the evening in a word of prayer, and we'll dive right in. Father God, we thank you for today. We thank you for the blessed freedom to be able to gather here and study your word. We thank you for the state of Texas and the wonderful, divinely appointed heat that we are seeing. God, we thank you for every bit of it because we know that it all is your will. We ask, Lord, that you would be with us these evenings, that you would edify us through the study of your word, that you would draw us together closer to one another as we all move closer to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So a churchgoer showed up at church one Sunday, and the pastor, seeing this guy come in the door, just almost fell right over whenever he saw him, because this guy never been to church his entire adult life. And the pastor knew him, and he'd tried before, never had any luck with it. And so he comes in, he sits through a whole sermon, and after the sermon, the pastor catches up with the guy, and he says, "Man, I'm so glad you decided to come to church today. What made you come?" And he said, "Well, Pastor, I got to be honest with you. A while back, I lost my favorite hat, lost my lucky hat. And I really, really love that hat. And I know that my buddy Bill, he goes to church here, and he has one just like it, and he's here every Sunday. And I knew he would be taking his hat off during church, and I figured he'd lay it in the back of the church while he was attending the service there. And I honestly thought I might steal his hat." And the preacher looked at him and said, "Well, you're not wearing a hat, so obviously you didn't steal it. What changed your mind?" And he said, "Well, you did a sermon on the 10 Commandments today. And after I heard that, I decided I didn't need to steal that hat after all." And the pastor started tearing up. They said, "Man, you mean after my sermon on the 10 Commandments, you heard, 'Thou shalt not steal,' and you decided I don't need that hat in my life anyway?" And he said, "No, Pastor, you got to the one on adultery, and I remembered where I left it." All right, little corny, not bad. So we're looking at 1 Kings 13 this evening, and we left off last week. Right there, there's our map. We left off last week with the kingdom of Israel in the north, comprised of the 10 tribes of Israel, and the kingdom of Judah in the south, which again is pretty much just Judah, a little bit of Benjamin, but mostly just Judah. So most of the tribes are concentrated in the north, in the kingdom of Israel, with eventually Samaria becomes the capital, and then in the south, the kingdom of Judah still maintains the capital of the city of Jerusalem. And in the north, we had Jeroboam, which is the man that God raised up to take the kingdom from the heir of Solomon. We all remember this. And in the south, we had, you remember the name? Rehoboam. Who do you look like? Keanu Reeves? No. All right. You'll see it again. In the south, we have Rehoboam. He was the son of Solomon. He was doomed from the get-go to lose the bulk of the kingdom, not because of anything that he did, but because God deemed it to be so whenever Solomon's heart was turned to idolatry by his numerous wives and concubines. He was turned to foreign gods. God said at the end of chapter 12, "I'm going to take all of this from you, and not from you directly, but from your heir. I'm going to take most of the kingdom." And then at the very end of chapter 12, we saw Jeroboam. Now that the kingdom was divided, Jeroboam was getting scared that the Feast of Tabernacles was coming up, and his people, who were bound by God to return back to the south, back to Jerusalem, to observe the Feast of Tabernacles, he was scared that they were all going to go south under the king Rehoboam there. Yeah, got to keep it. I have trouble with it too. Under the king Rehoboam there, and he was afraid that they were eventually going to get swayed and turn against him, and that he would lose the kingdom because of this. So what did he do? He created 2 molten calves, He said, people, these are your gods. These are the gods even, that brought you out of Egypt. He created his own altars. He created his own priests, not even of the Levitical line, not of the tribe of Levi, but his own priests, of who anybody who wanted to be a priest, you just sign up. And then he created his own religious feasts and festivals. So the man created his own religion. That's where we left off at the end of chapter 12. And now, in chapter 13, we get to see what happens to all that. Read with me the first 2 verses. And behold, there came a man of God. Oh, there we are. I started to say hi. Look at that. Rehoboam, and Jeroboam. All right, remember that. Well, remember all that. Good. It took a lot of work to do that. First 2 verses. And behold, there came a man of God out of Judah by the word of the Lord unto Bethel. And Jeroboam stood by the altar to burn incense. And he cried against the altar in the word of the Lord and said, O altar, altar, thus saith the Lord, behold, a child shall be born unto the house of David, Josiah by name, and upon thee shall he offer the priests of the high places that burn incense upon thee, and men's bones shall be burnt upon thee. So a man of God came out of Judah. Judah is the southern kingdom. And he was sent to go up north to Jeroboam in Israel, unto Bethel. Well, let's see. Unto Bethel. You see right there, just across the line there, where everybody was going to be observing all of this, because that's where he set up the new religion. Unto Bethel, where the altar had been constructed, God called up this prophet. Oh, there we are. God called up a prophet and sent him up there, right there to Bethel, to set the king straight. And the prophet is not named in 1 Kings. He's not named in the Bible. But according to the Jewish historian Josephus, who is pretty reliable on most everything he does, according to him, this prophet's name was Jadon. Jadon. And whether that's correct or not doesn't really matter, because this guy doesn't get a whole bunch of screen time in the Old Testament. But that is what is traditionally held to be this prophet's name. And in order to help you out with that, I made it look like Jadon Knots. Yeah, I know. Apparently God caught him off guard. So this prophet goes to Bethel, and he finds Jeroboam by the altar, and seemingly right in the midst of the act of worship, of this pagan idolatry, or at least very close to offering a burnt offering on this altar that he had created to worship the golden calves that he had created. And the prophet cried against the altar the words of God. Now, this whole chapter is filled with interesting verses, and this is one of them here. The prophet doesn't chew out the king. He didn't chew out any of the false priests that had been set there. The prophet cried out against the altar, against the instrument of this new bout of idolatry that had popped up here. And that sounds weird, doesn't it? He's crying out to this inanimate object. But listen to this. I read one commentary that I think pegs it pretty well. Listen. He cried against the altar, and consequently against all that worship, which is oft signified by the name of the altar. O altar, altar. He directs his speech to the altar partly because the following signs were wrought upon it, and partly to signify that Jeroboam would no more regard his words than the altar did, and yet they should take effect. Now, that makes sense to me. What he's saying there is Jeroboam is going to do what Jeroboam is going to do. Talking to him is like talking to a brick wall. It's like talking to an inanimate object. So why not just direct your speech directly to the inanimate object at the heart of the matter? It's almost as if he's ignoring King Jeroboam in this whole thing, as if the king has proved himself unworthy to be addressed by the mouth of God. But all of this is not half as neat as what the prophet actually says. The prophet says, "Thus saith the Lord, behold, a child shall be born unto the house of David, Josiah by name. And upon thee shall he offer the priests of the high places that burn incense upon thee, and men's bones shall be burnt upon thee. So this unnamed, more or less, prophet comes to this scene and he says, "Oh, altar, altar, listen up. The line of David is going to produce a child named Josiah, and that child will grow into a man who will offer the bones of these false prophets on this altar, on you." And you know what? That very thing happened about 330 years later. The lineage, the name, the action, all of it was predicted by the prophet, given to him by God, and then fulfilled in 2 Kings 23, which you think, oh, that's only a book away. It's about 330 years. 2 Kings 23, verse 15. "Furthermore, the altar that was at Bethel in the high place, which Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel sin, had made, even the altar in the high place he broke down. Then he demolished its stones, ground them to dust, and burned the Asherah. Now when Josiah turned, he saw the graves that were there on the mountain, and he sent and took the bones from the graves and burned them on the altar and defiled it according to the word of the Lord, which the man of God proclaimed, who proclaimed these things." So over 300 years later, that's like someone telling us back in 1696, before America was even founded, that a man named Donald would be elected president and would shut down the border. Called him out by name over 300 years prior. There's only one other instance of that specific prophecy happening in the Bible, and that's with Cyrus, the king of Persia, which happens in Nehemiah and around there. And we'll get into that, God willing, eventually. But that's amazing. 300 years prior, Josiah broke the altars, tore down the poles, then dug up the bones of the false priests who had been involved in the idolatry of Jeroboam. And there you go. I made this one look like, since it's Josiah, that is, Joe Pesci, not Josiah, Joe Pesci. I lost the little magnifying glass thing. But there he is. He's tending to a nice little barbecue of priest bones at this altar. And the guy, Josiah, he didn't do it because he was wanting to fulfill a prophecy from 300 years before. He may well have had no idea about the prophecy at all. Can any of you quote any Christian writers from 1696? Nope. So it's very possible he had no idea what was going on. He had decided within his will, given to him by God, that he was going to tear down the altars. And then he looked around and he said, you know what? I need to do something else. I need to desecrate these altars so that they are not fit for worship, for idolatrous worship going forward. And how do you desecrate something like that? You get something unclean for it. So he dug up bones. And what better bones to use than the bones of the priest that had consecrated the altar when it was instated? And he saw them on the mountainside and he sent for them. He said, everybody over there, those are the priests that did all of this. Go dig up their bones. They're 300-year-old bones. Bring them over here, throw it on this altar, and we're going to burn them. So, it wasn't that they were easily accessible or right next to it. He had to go send for them. He was enacting his own kind of poetic justice on the situation. And then the prophet said for all to hear, this is going to happen. And if you don't believe me this is going to happen, I'm going to give you a sign. Verses 3 through 5. And he gave a sign the same day, saying, this is the sign which the Lord hath spoken. Behold, the altar shall be rent, and the ashes that are upon it shall be poured out. And it came to pass, when King Jeroboam heard the saying of the man of God, which had cried against the altar in Bethel, that he put forth his hand from the altar, saying, lay hold on him. And his hand, which he put forth against him, dried up, so that he could not pull it in again to him. The altar also was rent, and the ashes poured out from the altar, according to the sign which the man of God had given by the word of the Lord. So the grander prophecy was going to take a while to come to pass, 300 years. So, And you might assume that God told the prophet as much. We don't really know, but in all practicality, the grander prophecy would not happen in the lifetimes of any who were gathered there to hear the prophet, or even anybody that they might tell, or even their kids. None of them are going to see it because it's over 300 years later. So to confirm its inevitable truth, that the prophet said there's going to be a much more immediate happening as well. I'm going to prophesy something else that's going to happen right now. I'm going to give you a sign. He says this altar is going to be partially destroyed. It uses the word rent. We don't know if that means in two, or if God's going to break off a chunk of it, or what's actually going to happen to the altar whenever he says it, but he uses the word rent. And then he says the ashes that have gathered up on the surface of this altar from all the burnt offerings and incense that you've been offering, all the burnt animal parts and the select parts of fat of the caul and all of, you remember all of that back in Leviticus and Exodus there. He said all of that stuff that's ashes is going to spill out on the ground. All this idolatry spilled out everywhere. And when King Jeroboam heard the words of the prophet, it says he reached out his hand. And I imagine it's to point to the guy, something like that. He's reaching out his hand to say, seize him. Say, take that guy. And whenever he does that, he says, seize him. His hand dries up. As soon as he reached his hand forward, the invisible power of God dried up his hand. Now, you can take that to me. I've seen some commentaries say that might mean withered. As Christ restored a withered hand, it might have. Some people say no, it's just cramped up. Like he literally couldn't draw it back to himself, but it was changed physically. We don't really know what God did. We know it was noticeable. We know the king had no doubt that God had done something to his hand, and the people around him could see it. King Jeroboam could not pull it back to himself. And at the very same time that happened, the altar of Bethel was broken, and the ashes that were heaped on top of the altar poured out onto the ground. And someone there might be tempted to ignore one or try and explain away one of the signs, but you can't explain away both of them. Seeing the king's hand wither and the divine power of God strike the altar and the ashes be poured out on the ground, just as the prophet said, is a sign that can't be ignored. It's two signs that can't be ignored even. Verses 6 through 10. And the king answered and said unto the man of God, entreat now the face of the Lord thy God, and pray for me, that my hand may be restored me again. And the man of God besought the Lord, and the king's hand was restored him again, and became as it was before. And the king said unto the man of God, come home with me, and refresh thyself, and I will give thee a reward. And the man of God said unto the king, if thou wilt give me half thine house, I will not go in with thee, neither will I eat bread nor drink water in this place. For so was it charged me by the word of the Lord, saying, eat no bread, nor drink water, nor turn again by the same way that thou camest. So he went another way and returned not by the way he came to Bethel. So King Jeroboam is rightly shaken up by what just happened. His hand just withered. He can't pull it back. The altar was rent, was torn into, or at least broken a great deal. It's just the ashes were pouring out. You might be able to explain one thing away, but both of them happening simultaneously. It would be obvious to everyone there that the prophet was true, was in fact a prophet, and was preaching the word, and God had acted. So the king turned to the prophet and he begged him. He said, pray to, and it's sad too. It says, entreat now the face of the Lord thy God. He doesn't take ownership quite like he might have when he was the one who was raised up from obscurity to take the kingdom by God. You would think he would have a little bit more ownership in this, but apparently he didn't have enough, to not create his own religion, and now he's seeing the power of God, and he still hasn't quite taken hold of it. He says, entreat now the face of the Lord thy God, and ask him to restore my hand. And the prophet he's gracious enough to actually do it, and he besought God on King Jeroboam's behalf, and God restored the king's hand to its normal state, and obviously the king is pleased, so he's happy with the prophet. And he wants to show his appreciation to the prophet, and he says, you come with me. You dine with me tonight. Let's break bread. Let's go get you some bread and water. It's been a long trip to come over here all the way to Bethel from Jerusalem. I'd love to treat you and give you a reward, which would have been gold, something, talents of silver. Who knows what it would have been. We don't get to see because the prophet says, no. He says, no, not even if you would give me up to half of your kingdom, I'm not sticking around here. Why? Because he was commanded by God to not eat bread and to not drink water and to not return by the same route that he used to arrive. God said, have no communion with those idolatrous people. Don't break bread, don't share a meal, don't have a drink and relax and get to know them. Get in, condemn their practice, break their altar, deliver the word of God, and then get out. And now the command to not turn again by the same way he came, that's a little ambiguous. It may mean people know the route that you used when you arrive, and seeing what you've done, they may try and hinder you from leaving, either from kindness, saying, hey, come stay with us. You're obviously a great prophet of God. It might be kind. It might be malice. They might not like someone coming in and breaking up all their idolatrous services, and it might be best if he takes another route home. That could be one meaning. It could also be a vaguer meaning that more or less says, get in and get out. Do not wait around. Do not tarry. Don't stay among these wicked people and their wicked practices. I won't have one of my true prophets tainted by all this. Given the context of the passage, it could be either one. Regardless, the prophet obeyed. He abstained from the refreshments from the offering of a meal, and he returned home along a different path. Now, verses 11 through 19. And this is where it gets crazy. Now there dwelt an old prophet in Bethel, and his sons came and told him all the works that the man of God had done that day in Bethel. The words which he had spoken unto the king, them they told also to their father. And their father said unto them, what way went he? For his sons had seen what way the man of God went, which came from Judah. And he said unto his sons, saddle me the ass. So they saddled him the ass, and he rode thereon, and went after the man of God, and found him sitting under an oak. And he said unto him, art thou the man of God that camest from Judah? And he said, I am. Then he said unto him, come home with me, and eat bread. And he said, I may not return with thee, nor go in with thee, neither will I eat bread, nor drink water with thee in this place. For it was said to me by the word of the Lord, thou shalt eat no bread, nor drink water there, nor turn again to go by the way that thou camest. He said unto him, I am a prophet also as thou art. And an angel spake unto me by the word of the Lord, saying, bring him back with thee into thine house, that he may eat bread and drink water. But he lied unto him. So he went back with him and did eat bread in his house and drank water. So now another nameless prophet enters into the account. And he was living in Bethel where all of this went down. And when it had happened, and the first prophet, whom I will call Jadon going forward just for the ease, so I'm not saying old prophet 1 and old prophet 2 or something like that. We'll say Jadon. This nameless prophet hears from his sons what Jadon had done. And he says, you guys get my donkey. And when they did, the prophet rode out to find Jadon because his sons had seen where the prophet was traveling. So he meets him under an oak tree. Now in the actual text, in the Hebrew, it says the oak tree. So it's probably a very large, well-known oak tree. And we've seen that previously as well in the Old Testament, where areas will be named by large trees where people gather with some regularity. But he says he met him at the oak tree. And the old prophet asked him, are you the man of God that has come from Judah? And Jadon told him he was. And then the prophet said, come home with me and eat bread. And Jadon gave him the exact same answer that he gave the king. He says, no, God has expressly forbidden it. But then in verse 18, this old unnamed prophet said to Jadon, I am a prophet too, just like you. We're in the same club. And he said, man, an angel came to me and he gave me a message from God that I'm supposed to find you and bring you back to my house and feed you and give you water, but it was all a lie, and Jadon fell for it. And this is one of those times where we read of someone doing something in the Bible, and above all else, we want to know why, right? What could possibly be the motivation for this old prophet to come out of nowhere, to go put in the work of saddling up his donkey and riding out and finding the guy and lying to him? What's the motivation behind all this? And people, I hate to tell you, we don't know. All we can do is speculate on this, as rough as that is. Now, maybe this old unnamed prophet was the prophet for the area. He was the prophet of Bethel, and he didn't like someone coming in on his turf, and he didn't like that God had stepped over him, and because he had tolerated this idolatry in the land, maybe he was losing a bit of ground with God and he was getting jealous. Maybe he hadn't heard from God in a long time, had not been in the presence of a godly man in forever, and he was anxious for camaraderie, for that kind of a bond, that kind of a relationship with someone else who knew what he had gone through as well, and he didn't care what he had to do to get that again. Maybe he was completely wicked, and he had fallen into the same idolatry everybody else was, and he wanted to counteract the words of the prophets and show him to be a false prophet by compromising him in whatever way he could. We don't know. Could be any one of those things. What we do know is that this old prophet was genuinely a prophet. God speaks to him in the coming verses. And he had to have spoken to him previously in order for him to be so loosely called a prophet, to have that title going forward like this. But we also know that even if he wasn't flat out wicked, he was at the very least somewhat worldly. He didn't display the kind of godliness that we're accustomed to seeing in the Old Testament prophets. But a wicked prophet, that's not a new concept, right? We've seen that before. You remember the name? He had a donkey too. Balaam, there we go. Balaam and the talking donkey. He was the wicked prophet who beat his donkey. The donkey wouldn't go because there was an angel in the way, and he keeps beating the donkey until the donkey looked around him and said, "Man, I've been a good donkey to you. We've gone back for years. Why are you beating me like this?" And then God eventually opens his eyes and he sees the angel in the road up there. Balaam told the king of the Moabites, when the people were coming out of the Exodus, out of the wilderness, he told the king of the Moabites how to compromise the children of Israel, how to conquer them by infiltrating their ranks through the feminine wiles of the Moabite women. Numbers 31 says, "And Moses was wroth with the officers of the host, with captains over thousands and captains over hundreds, which came from the battle. And Moses said unto them, Have ye saved all the women alive? Behold, these caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to commit trespass against the Lord in the matter of Peor, and there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord." It was told Moses, he said, "Hey man, Balaam is the one that gave the counsel to the king of the Moabites to infiltrate the Israelite people through the wild women." Now, the thing to take away is that the narrative is intentionally following Jadon here. It doesn't make any attempt to account for the unnamed prophet. It's about Jadon and the lessons of Jadon. In fact, and it might upset you to know, going forward, we don't even see the old prophet get punished. Now, God may have done something, but it's not in this account. But again, that's not the focus of what's on right here. So the real lesson for this portion of the passage is be careful who you listen to, right? There are people out there, even still today, who claim to be prophets, who take the title of apostle. People out there who very loosely wear the title of bishop and even pastor. And they will tell anyone who will listen, "I've heard from God. Jesus is coming back on this specific date. I'm a prophet and you can believe me," and they keep being proven false. They'll tell their congregation, "If you sow a seed of $1,000 tonight, you will receive $10,000 within the next 2 weeks." That's what God has told me. If you're willing to release it, it will be returned to you. They're the same ones that'll say God is love and there's no reason to change because we're all accepted. God is complete acceptance. We're all going to heaven. There's no need to repent, no need to examine your life, no need for any of that. Stay the way you are. Just keep coming to church, writing those checks. It's the same people that'll say, I've clinically died for 5 minutes and I talked to God and I came back and this is what he wanted me to do. He told me to plant a church here and plant a church there or something like that. Or they'll tell you the future. They'll tell you all manner of blasphemies disguised as holy prophetic teachings. People, you got to be careful who you listen to because you have received a revelation from God. It's right here. You've got it. You don't need other people for that. Now, it's nice to read the commentaries. It's nice to have some pastors that you can listen to. Lord knows I listen to a whole bunch of them, and I've heard a whole bunch of sermons, and I don't think I know it all. By far, by a country mile, I don't know it all. So yes, it's good, but I've been taken in by people that I looked up to that were really good pastors in my mind that eventually fell, and then maybe they were, and maybe they weren't, and that's a whole other, that's a long debate on whether you can completely discard the teachings from the Bible of a pastor that has been proven to have fallen or to have been sinning the whole time.
Tell her periodically, whatever he was going to do, he would say, God has told me that the church needs to do this or this or this. How do you argue with that? I mean, you say, no, God didn't tell you that. I mean, it makes a very difficult argument. I very much dislike that. I don't think pastors should do that. I don't think anybody should do that. Lay people, pastors, or anyone else. And so if I hear someone say, God told me to do this or so, whatever, red flags go off everywhere to me. I mean, it's just...
Yeah.
Maybe it happened. It had never happened to me. You just,
What it really boils down to, if you have anyone in your life, outside your life, on the news, in whatever media you're taking that contradicts this, you can just go ahead and lay them aside. I don't care how articulate they are, or how entertaining they are, or how nice the church is, or how many amenities they have, or how good the kids program is, or something like that. Them parachuting into the sanctuary or coming in on the zip line, I won't say is blasphemous in and of itself, but when you see people like that, they tend to contradict this thing. And if you're told to test these people through this. Yes, ma'am.
This says that we are just as responsible to know the truth as these false teachers. I mean, we're responsible to be able to
test them.
detect false doctrine. Because we have His Word. We have discernment.
It is a huge part of the New Testament that says, beware false teachers. That's like the most prominent warning in the New Testament even, is beware false teachers. And the temperature on that dial just gets turned up more and more and more as you get further and further into the Bible until you're in Revelation. It's like, really, beware false teachers, because you're going to get marked. You're going to fall away, and you'll fall to all sorts of different temptations and things like that. So, this example one right here, Old Testament even, been going on for thousands of years. Beware false teachers, and it still rings true today.
If a woman says it just doesn't feel right, you better listen to her.
Yeah.
Because it's like sometimes, yeah, it's just some things just don't feel right. And I think that's the discernment that He gives you to stop, pray about it, think about it, and use it and check it out.
Definitely. Don't think you're too good, because here, a prophet of God hears it and falls prey to it. Because I imagine it's what he wanted to hear. Now, I can't say for sure, but I would imagine it's what he wanted to hear. It's been a long, hard trek up to Bethel. It's been a long, hot day. He's got miles to go before he can refresh himself, and God has prohibited him from food and water. He's commanded him to abstain from all these things that would make his path so much easier. And here comes someone that says, hey, God told me. He changed his mind. And Jaden doesn't dig, doesn't ask any follow-up questions, doesn't ask him for a sign. I don't think he'd be out of line on that. God, you told me this. I have another prophet here telling me this. Give me a sign. I don't think he'd be out of line. I don't think that's testing God. When you have somebody coming and flat out lying to you, something like that, now, in the prophet's shoes at least here, he goes with the unnamed prophet to his house, and they break bread. And then look what happens, verses 20 through 24.
And it came to pass, as they sat at the table, that the word of the Lord came unto the prophet that brought him back. And he cried unto the man of God that came from Judah, saying, Thus saith the Lord, forasmuch as thou hast disobeyed the mouth of the Lord, and hast not kept the commandment which the Lord thy God commanded thee, but camest back, and hast eaten bread and drunk water in the place of the which the Lord did say to thee, Eat no bread and drink no water, thy carcass shall not come unto the sepulchre of thy fathers. And it came to pass, after he had eaten bread, and after he had drunk, that he saddled for him the ass to wit, for the prophet whom he had brought back. And when he was gone, a lion met him by the way, and slew him, and his carcass was cast in the way, and the ass stood by it. The lion also stood by the carcass. So they're sitting at the table, and while they're there, eating and drinking and having a good time, the word of God comes to this old prophet, and he cries out to Jaden a condemnation from God. He said, Thus saith the Lord, you have disobeyed directly what God said, and you haven't kept his explicit command, and here you are in this idolatrous land, eating and drinking, and your dead body will not be laid to rest in the tomb of your fathers. And that's not just like a condemnation of burial rights or something. He's not saying that you're being denied burial rights. That's not the judgment being passed down. It's saying more than that. It's saying Jaden is going to die suddenly in a place where none of his people will be able to properly tend to his body. It's saying there won't be any people there to gather your body up. It's going to happen in a foreign land. It's essentially saying you're dying before you can make it home, because burial rights were a huge deal for the Jewish people. Still are. But back in the Old Testament, huge deal. All right? To say you're not going to be laid up in the sepulcher of your fathers means that you're not having, obviously you're a prophet of God. You have people that would like to tend to you in this way. It's God saying you're never making it back to them. And can you imagine the look on this guy's face when he's told this at the dinner table? I mean, the anger that would have felt like they're just sitting there eating, and all of a sudden, I don't know the expression whenever a prophet actually gets a word from God. I don't know if it. I don't mean to make light of it, but he looks at him and he says, "Because you have done what I've asked you to do, God is not going to return you to your people." Can you really, guy? It would have been that, I don't know, this unacceptance of the situation, I would imagine, followed by anger, since the news of the condemnation from the very man that convinced him that there would be no condemnation for what he was asking him to do. And we don't get the play-by-play in the narrative here. The narrative says more or less that he finished the meal, the donkey was saddled, and then he left. But people, that can't be all that happened. It can't be. We're not being told a good chunk of the story here, because again, the relationship between these two is not really the crux of the narrative. It's obedience to God and caution when dealing with other people. But you can imagine two prophets sitting at lunch, and one of them tells the other, because what I asked you to do and you did it, God is going to kill you. They would have had words. We don't get the words, but they would have had words.
And how did he finish eating and drinking? I mean, if I just heard that.
I mean, at this point,
I could eat anymore.
yeah, I don't know. You'd think you would lose your appetite. At the same time, you're like, why?
On the other hand, you might as well.
You might as well. On the other hand, you might extend your stay a few days. As soon as I hit the road, I feel like I'm going to die. Maybe I'll stick around a bit.
I'll have that sucker piece of cake.
No, that second piece of cake. I said no to the cheesecake earlier. Get the waiter. I'm deciding to indulge.
That's like, wait a minute, that's like Don Booth. Do you remember the missile crisis that was coming into Hawaii? And they told Hawaii there's a missile coming?
That was, what, 2 years ago?
2 years ago,
Something
Don
like that.
Booth was there at that time. And he had just ordered breakfast, scrambled eggs, everything. And so he said it was really amazing that everyone was really calm. And he said, I called the waitress back over and I said, let me change that to eggs Benedict. You might as well, you know?
So, they get the donkey saddled. Jadon gets on it, goes on his way back home to Bethel. And on his way, a lion kills him, mauls him to death. And his body was left on the road. And then to show that this is a divine punishment, the divine nature of the punishment here, the lion and the donkey both stand peacefully next to the body. Alright? So that's an odd little scene right there. Not something you would see normally. And it's just so y'all appreciate how sausage is made here. You know how hard it is to get ChatGPT to put a dead body in a picture? You can't ask it that specifically. So I had to say, give me a lion and a donkey. And then a guy asleep whose just foot is just in the picture. It's tricky. So don't worry about AI taking over the world, because I was saying it's tricky. Verses 25 through 32. And behold, men passed by and saw the carcass cast in the way, and the lion standing by the carcass. And they came and told it in the city where the old prophet dwelt. And when the prophet that brought him back from the way heard thereof, he said, It is the man of God who is disobedient unto the word of the Lord. Therefore the Lord hath delivered him unto the lion, which hath torn him and slain him, according to the word of the Lord which he spake unto him. And he spake to his sons, saying, Saddle me the ass. And they saddled him. And he went and found his carcass cast in the way, and the ass and the lion standing by the carcass. The lion had not eaten the carcass, nor torn the ass. And the prophet took up the carcass of the man of God, and laid it upon the ass, and brought it back. And the old prophet came to the city to mourn and to bury him. And he laid his carcass in his own grave. And they mourned over him, saying, Alas, my brother. And it came to pass after he had buried him that he spake to his sons, saying, When I am dead, then bury me in the sepulchre wherein the man of God is buried. Lay my bones beside his bones. For the saying which he cried by the word of the Lord against the altar in Bethel, and against all the houses and the high places which are in the cities of Samaria, shall surely come to pass. So the prophet Jidon left the house of the unnamed prophet. I'm sure he's pretty anxious about it. Y'all ever see what was the cartoon of the Headless Horseman with Ichabod Crane, the old cartoon where he's trotting with it? And actually the guy looks like Don Knotts. He's all spindly and everything. He's kind of looking around the whole time. I imagine it was like that. You know something about to happen. And the old prophet had no idea exactly what was going to follow him, or any real way to follow up on what was happening to Jidon, except for just keeping his ears open for gossip. But word traveled fast. Men passed by the body of Jidon on the road and saw that he had been mauled to death by a lion. They took note of the scene because, unlike you might expect, the lion had not left. The donkey had not left. The lion hadn't eaten the body, even though he killed it. The lion hadn't even attacked the donkey. All he did was kill the guy, and then they all just stood there. These two animals that are typically at odds with each other, standing next to a body, acting weird. So people took notice of it. And when word of the scene reached the old prophet, he knew exactly who it was. And he knew exactly what had happened. So once again, the old prophet says, Boys, saddle the donkey. And they do. And so he goes out and he finds the body of Jidon, and the surreal scene of the donkey and the lion standing peacefully together over the corpse. And the prophet took up the corpse of Jidon, and it says in verse 29, the prophet took it back to the city in order to mourn and to bury him. And the old prophet took the torn body of him and laid it to rest in the prophet's
own tomb. As he did it, he was saying, Alas, my brother. So Again, mixed signals from this guy, right? He's going out of his way to try to make some kind of arrangements for the body of the prophet, but that's a small kindness to go out of your way to bury the person that you more or less murdered. So before you jump on the words of verse 30 and say, oh, look, the old prophet was mournful and he called him brother as he lay him down. That phrase that it uses there in verse 30, he laid his carcass in his own grave and they mourned over him saying, alas, my brother. That is a formulaic exclamation. That is not him creating his own words. It's like British people saying, God save the king, or something like that. It is a common expression at funerals. What are you saving the king from? Is the king in danger? No, it's just a general well-wishing. It's a formula right there. It's a preset statement. So it's not the old prophet truly expressing inner thoughts about this prophet that was dead. It was a common phrase for mourners. And then, in this rather selfish move, he tells his sons, when I die, I want you to take my bones and lay them in the same tomb with the true prophet here. I want you to lay them in the same sepulcher beside this prophet, because what this prophet said is going to happen will certainly happen. And that does two things here. Now, he recognizes Jadon, he's a true prophet, so he wants to be buried with him because it elevates him beyond his station, beyond where he rightfully should be. It'd be like me saying, when I die, bury me in Arlington National Cemetery. Well, I have no right to that. That's me leeching off the notoriety. When I die, bury me next to the former President Bush or something. That's neat, but that elevates me more than it does anything for the body of whoever I'm laying in. They'd say, well, here lies Colt. He was buried next to this guy. That's me leeching off of them. But the second thing it does, think this over, he says, do it because what he prophesied is certainly going to come to pass. There's a very real possibility he didn't want his bones dug up and then used to desecrate the altar that was going to be destroyed in the future there. He said, don't count me among the idolatrous priests. Bury me with that prophet, because I know with this true prophet, they won't desecrate that tomb, but they may very well dig my bones up and throw me on an altar because I've allowed all of this idolatry to happen. Again, speculation. We don't know that that's exactly what he's thinking, but I'd say it's a pretty good bet. Verses 33 and 34 to end the chapter. After this thing, Jeroboam returned not from his evil way, but made again of the lowest of the people priests of the high places, whosoever would. He consecrated him, and he became one of the priests of the high places. And this thing became sin unto the house of Jeroboam, even to cut it off and to destroy it from off the face of the earth. So we get a nice little PS to the whole ordeal. After all the signs, after the withering of the hand and the breaking of the altar, Jeroboam is not moved. He's plowing forward. He's continuing with the golden calves. These are your God. He's continuing with the sacrifices and the incense. He's continuing making priests out of anybody that wants to be a priest. Just come on in, sign up. There's no background check. We'll give you the robes. Just line forms to the right. And it got so bad that it was considered sin unto the house of Jeroboam, sin so severe that God decided to destroy it from the face of the earth. He said, I'm not putting up with this. I'm going to cut off this house. And now, chapter 14 is 2 weeks away, all right? Because I'm not here next week. I don't take a whole bunch of vacation, but I am taking next week to do a nice little road trip. So y'all read ahead, think on it, chew on it a bit, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.